Okay, as they take their seats, we have space here on the couch, so I'll just scoot over so that you feel comfortable taking up space here.
I can speak.
We also have that seat, but nobody seems to want to sit on it, so we'll make space here on the couch. So I'm very happy to invite the guests here on the stage, and I will introduce them one by one. Here to my immediate right, we have Nataliya Gumenyuk. She's a Ukrainian journalist and specialist in foreign affairs and founder of the Public Interest Journalism Lab. Next to Nataliya, we have Franak Viačorka, who's a senior advisor to Svetlana Tichanovskaya, who we saw speaking to Marietta Slomka yesterday. He is also a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Then we have with us Anna Maria Trăsnea, who's the State Secretary of Berlin for the Promotion of Democracy and International Affairs. Great to see you as well. And last, certainly but not least, Peter Pomerantsev, journalist, author, and the producer of many TV shows as well, senior fellow at the Institute of Global Affairs at the London School of Economics. Thank you all for joining me. We'll give them a first round of applause. Thank you. So we are going to start with statements to get us into this topic. And so Peter, I believe you're going to start us off with your statement on disinformation, marginalization, and democracy.
Thank you very much, and it's a huge honor to be here. So I think what we've seen over and over again in many conflicts, but really especially in this conflict in Ukraine, the abuse of language leads to the abuse of power. They go hand in hand. First, there is a violence against language. The powerful, in this case the Kremlin, seek to show that they can define reality, that they can take terms like denazification, which should be a meaningful word, and render it meaningless. And by doing that, they're attacking a whole set of values and historical meanings that we put into that word. And that violence against language, that leaving language free of any kind of meaning, goes hand in hand and in many ways creates the path towards violence against people, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and an intent to genocide. It's been very interesting watching this unfold in Ukraine. I actually live in the United States at the moment, at the same time that there's a reckoning with a similar phenomenon in the US, this abuse of language and abuse of power, in a much milder way than what we see in Ukraine, but with the January 6th committee, which is an attempt to hold Donald Trump and the group around him to account, and the trial against Alex Jones, who's a conspiracy theorist, propagandist, whose horrible language has caused horrible damage to the victims of school shootings. And in Ukraine, I think we're facing this in a much, much bigger and more powerful and more important landscape. But again, a huge amount of what we can do, by we I mean the people who work in media, with meanings, is try to restore the meaning of language and truth. Now, how can you do that in practice? Two of us here are actually involved in a project, and I'll let my colleague Nataliya Gumenyuk say more about this, which we call the Reckoning Project, where we unite legal research into war crimes with journalism. Our aim is to really think about restoring truth and justice both in the courts of law and in the courts of public opinion. I think that's the edge of a challenge that we all face. Without this underlying value of language and the value of rights, a rules-based order and a democracy can't function. So the war in Ukraine is, of course, a military war, first and foremost. We have to support Ukraine in the military victory, but it's also a battle for restoring the meaning of language and restoring the rights that are being taken away with such mercilessness.
Thank you, Peter. Anna Maria.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I would like to welcome you all here at our international conference, and I would like also to thank you so far for the inspiring reflections that I've observed yesterday and also today, and this energy of young and old and of diverse and ambitious masterminds that already work on solutions of our time inspire me and give me hope, and therefore I'm very pleased to be here today. And I want you first and foremost at the beginning to ask you one thing. I think we have overlapping crises. We know that the old rules of governing do not work anymore, and therefore we need to do one thing. We need to cooperate more. We need to have a systematic change on how we govern the world, and we can make a start by changing our attitude. Our democracies are increasingly under threat and exposed to attacks. This is also what this panel is about. Freedom of expression, freedom of press are not a matter of course, as my fellow panelists will make impressively clear, and it has been already a topic of yesterday. Against this background and against this development, it is important that we show solidarity and stand up for our values together. And what can this mean on the stage of urban diplomacy? It is also important for us to learn from each other quickly. It is important for us to draw conclusions, how we enable each other's, how we enable cities and actors, stakeholders to act effectively in these challenging times. And what does mean concretely? One lesson as cities that we learned is that we need to question traditional models of governance. We need to arrive at new forms of cooperation, and these forms imply the experiences of cities that play a central role in solving these problems. So when finding good solutions to the challenges of the present and the future, 3 points are very important to me. First, we must achieve even closer cooperation between authorities and civil society. Democracy means, on the one hand, appreciating commitment, on the other, delivering infrastructure, and it means also to participation in decision-making. Second point that I want to mention is that we must cooperate more closely at all levels. This means that cities must be seen at the international level and also the European level as partners in tackling problems. Why is this so? I want to put your focus on the fact that foreign policy, as is made in our days and for decades and for hundreds of years, means the exclusion of marginalized groups. So therefore, foreign policy needs to be democratized by implying the perspective of cities in order to be more democratic and to give sustainable answers to global challenges. Cities are the places where marginalized groups meet mainstream society. Cities can be lighthouses in this democratization movement of foreign policy, and this is the message that I want to have from Berlin from this day on. The more inclusive governance cities apply, the better they can thrive. And therefore, I come to my third point. It is also important that cities cooperate more with one another. It is very important that cities cooperate in defending democratic values, but also in sharing solutions, because we do not have to redefine the wheel again and again when already has been found certain solutions in a particular city. Let me explain more concrete how this can look like by giving you 2 concrete examples. The first concerns dealing with refugees and the migration we have experienced in the last half year, and the second involves looking at the big challenges that we have on the issues of democracy in times of populism and authoritarian nationalism. It has been clear for many years that we need solutions that encompass all levels, and this is also the approach that led to a more successful immigration politics. Only by taking a pan-European approach can we develop a way where refugees are where the help for refugees that we are implementing is both compassionate on the one hand, but also realistic, so that it works in the cities where the refugees arrive. So this means creating a safe refuge on the other hand, and also integrating and promoting integration in the cities and the towns. And therefore, again, I come to my point from the beginning, we need cooperation at all levels. We also need direct cooperation across all levels in order to find good solutions for everyone. This means for the refugees that are coming in the city, for the residents that already live here, for the people that are committed citizens that want to help in this time of crisis, in order to deliver aid and concrete help. So this brings me to the topic of civil society and democratization, engagement, and active citizenship. When many people came from to Poland, to Germany, to other cities from Europe, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a huge amount of people were shown their solidarity and helped spontaneously. This happened directly at the train stations, through donations, through helping, getting a job, finding accommodation. So there was also, and I want to make a point why it is necessary to have a look at it. In 2015 and 2016, we also had a crisis with the war in Syria, and there were a lot of people coming, but there was a major difference in the way we approached things. We had no systematic coordination of the volunteers and between the volunteers and the authorities. So therefore, we had a situation where everybody involved was frustrated and our help was ineffective. So we wanted to learn from that. So we learned to cooperate with civil society and to involve them in our decision-making processes while we were managing the crisis in the city with over 320,000 people arriving within the last 6 months in Berlin. And I think that this can be a model of, at a low scale, at a small scale, how a new model for governance can work out into the benefit for everybody involved. So therefore, we need multi-level and cross-cultural and cross-sectoral cooperation between public administration, between stakeholders from civil society, as well as economy. And now I come to my second example, just to make it, we are talking about solutions, and therefore I think the cities, this is the benefit that we can give, and therefore it concerns the defense of strengthening democratic values. In democracies in times when it is under great threat, this means also approaching new ideas, new models of cooperation. And this starts with one thing. We have to recognize that as democratic societies, we need to invest in the foundations of our democracies. We need to strengthen them within in order to make them resilient, in order to ultimately make them capable to withstand threats. So we want to start by putting the discussion of democracy back on the agenda. And so we did that in Berlin with Berlin Democracy Day, which is the International Democracy Day and just took place yesterday. We are also proud in Berlin that we are going an inclusive path. Young people can participate and are asked on their opinions on many issues. We will also introduce the right to vote from 16 years old on. And these are just examples how I can show you that marginalized groups are part of the city, and we are living here a culture of participation based on following pillars like having guidelines for citizens' participation and an engagement strategy to which the Senate committed to implement it in all areas of the city. We are also committed to the fact that we want to introduce deliberative forms of democracy, because democracy means so much more than having the right to vote. This is essential, but what happens in the time in between? And therefore, we want to introduce the Berlin-wide participation, budget, citizens' councils, and we have a vast infrastructure of civic education programs. And yeah, this is something that can make democracy resilient and can make democracy very active. Another important aspect I want to mention is how we address this topic in the sphere of urban diplomacy. We need, as I said, we need to join together as cities, and we need to, to put all forces in defending our values. And therefore, this is a core theme for us in Berlin in the strategy we apply, and we will join the Pact of Cities, of Free Cities, before the end of September in Prague this year. This alliance is specifically for addresses metropoles that are confronted with nationalist governments. This is Bratislava, this is Budapest, Prague, Warsaw, and there are, progressive local governments that are sharing our values, and we are there to engage in that and to advocate. We do also advocate in the sphere of urban diplomacy when it comes to a clear stance, when it comes to make visible Russian war and to name Ukraine as a sovereign state and to take a clear position on that. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about the new unknown. We see that there are many, many difficulties in many open questions, and the new unknown, navigating Zeitenwende, describes the state of the world right now in a very succinctly way, but in my opinion, it's also quite accurately, and therefore we need new solutions. So we are dealing with many unknowns, but if we take a clear stance, and when we are standing together for democratic values, when we are respecting human rights and advocating this, then I'm sure we have a chance in dealing with all this crisis. So there is enormous democracy energy in the cities, there's an enormous democratic power. I think we should combine this energy and dare to take part in a democratic awakening together everywhere. And therefore, I think when we talk about all these topics, we should put all forces together. Let's get it done for a better future.
Thank you, Anna Maria. Franak.
Good afternoon. As you know, I'm from Belarus. I was 6 years old when Lukashenko came to power. Belarus became dictatorship, and when he came to power, he mobilized all the media, all the state TV channels, newspapers, in order to create parallel reality. And the entire world, entire Europe, all the post-Soviet countries, including Ukraine, they were moving forward, and Belarus was sort of frozen in time. Did you watch the movie Goodbye Lenin? Anyone? So so we actually were living in such reality. When Lukashenko, he was like the main hero, the main character was creating the reality that nothing did not change. Soviet Union still exists. He preserved Soviet symbols, Soviet KGB, all the monuments of Dzerzhinsky and 13 monuments of Lenin were cleaned and washed in the center of Minsk. So people who are nostalgic about the Soviet past, they feel comfortable. And years after years, this reality was sustaining, did not change at all, while the whole world moved forward. And we still were washing and cleaning the monuments of Lenin. And after 5-10 years, it was still working. People were feeling okay. There are many wars, the world is unstable, and Belarus is a stable Soviet country as it was many years before. But after 20 and 30 years, this approach became obsolete, because suddenly people realized that the whole world is far, far ahead, and we are far, far behind. And already propaganda, beautiful pictures, movies about how cool we are and how bad the world is, doesn't work anymore. All the friends are gone already, like Hugo Chavez, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, this Libyan, what's his name? Gaddafi, big friend of Belarus, who put these tents in the downtown of Minsk. They're already gone, and Lukashenko just stayed alone. And in 2020, people suddenly started to realize, like in the movie Goodbye Lenin, that something is going wrong. And what helped us a lot to explain that something is going wrong? Technology, social media. And I would surprise you, it's not Telegram perhaps, but it's TikTok, which basically opened the eyes to many, many new people who were not involved at all. And TikTok was something which was very new in 2019 and 20. And many young people, they were not watching political media or TV channels broadcasted from abroad, but they were watching and scrolling, 24/7 TikTok newsfeed, where political presenters, bloggers started to tell the real story, not the story told as in Goodbye Lenin's movies. And this helped us a lot to gain new people. And Telegram, where people, after watching TikTok's movies, were coming and were joining, they started not just watching, but also participating in activities. And the possibility to tell the real story of what's happening in the country and the instrument to mobilize society helped Belarusians in 2020 to break the status quo, to wake up the frozen country, frozen in the past. And the revolution which started in 2020, it was basically the result of the smart use of technology and of smart and timely narrative that life in Belarus can be different, that Belarusians deserve the better future. We did not win in 2020. The revolution was brutally cracked down, as you know, and thousands of people are in prisons. Many were killed by the regime. Lukashenko gave space to Russian troops to attack Ukraine. But this idea of changes and this picture of new Belarus, the real Belarus, it's still in minds of the society. So we didn't win, but we definitely did not lose yet. But what we lack right now, and I want to raise this issue, we need the help from tech companies. I think what we lacked in 2020 to win, we lacked understanding and interest from Google, from Alphabet, from Meta and Facebook, from TikTok as well, who didn't give space, who blocked political videos about Belarus, who basically didn't understand their importance for Belarusians in telling the truth, and perhaps without their willingness, they played on the side of the regime somehow. And only right now, 2 years after we started to cooperate with them, they agreed that Belarus deserves the separate media segment, so Belarusian news can be shown to users separately from Russian news. And because before it was when you go to the Google News and Russian news are mixed with Belarusian news, and of course they will be really living in the distorted reality. I think that tech companies for democratic processes, they can do much more, and we together should think how to help, how they can help societies like Belarusian ones, and not only in our aspiration, in our fight for democratic changes. Thank you.
Nataliya.
So I'm a Kiev-based reporter, focused on the conflict reporting, and I came from Kiev now, from Ukraine. But the last time, not the last time, but one of the longest time recently I've been in Berlin was 2015, when I, in fact, was doing a research on the Syrians coming to Berlin and to Germany, and because I worked in the Middle East prior to that, and I was absolutely interested in this idea of the empathy, and it was very also important for me, for the Ukrainian media, to tell their story. And now when there is a war in Ukraine, and we have this discussion about the information propaganda and the role of the journalist, but I'm coming to that. So now I often, sometimes in the international discussion I participate, I'm asked like, don't you feel that there is like this big interest to Ukraine and it's uncomparable to what the others people should deserve? And for me, working for quite a many years to bring this empathy to all vulnerable people globally, I should say that the reason for that, in fact, is not because, Ukrainians are Europeans or whatsoever, but the fact that actually Ukraine is democratic. Because Ukraine is democratic, there is a strong civil society which is doing everything possible to get this global support, because Ukrainian media are there. They can tell this story. Because Ukrainian media space is open, there could be international media there. Because there is an elected government and democratic president, and there is a trust to what's going on. So the democracy is exactly the result why Ukrainians are capable to keep this story going. And it was not, we shouldn't take it for granted. Today, we have a day when we commemorate a colleague of us. I have here, I just mentioned my dear colleague Sevgi Musayeva, who is an editor-in-chief of one of the first Ukrainian independent papers online, and the founder, Georgy Gongadze, 22 years ago, was killed, allegedly with the participation of the top Ukrainian authorities. But I should say there was a long road. 2 years ago with Sevgi, we were sitting in Kiev on the screening of the documentary reflecting our critical past and our authoritarian past. And the mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, was there. So there were the others. And the same stories in Belarus of the people killed exactly at that time are still buried. But with the democracy, responsibility comes. And that's why I feel like that in Ukraine today, a lot of people, disregarding who they are, they can work for the train, they can work, wherever, or feel that they can influence something which is going on in their country. It's very direct. If there is a democracy, you feel you can do something. So, of course, I'm a professional journalist, so I should do something to help my people. Now, together with Peter and a number of the international and the Ukrainian reporters, we're really working on the Reckoning project, which documents alleged war crimes, crimes against humanity all over the country for the last half a year. We are there to make films, movies, memorials, but also to build cases. And there is a whole variety of the stories I can tell about these horrible things happening in Ukraine. We work on the ground. But I should also say where the information comes. Of course, the more I look at that, the more I see that these murders of thousands and thousands of Ukrainians won't be possible without the 20 years of dehumanization of the Ukrainians in the Russian propaganda. Real dehumanization. Those people, those soldiers, when we tell the stories on the ground, they're capable to kill these people because the Ukrainians were, there was this idea of Nazis or something. But it's the main tool for the murder of the people. And with Peter, we also discussed the responsibility of the propagandists. And sometimes we can speak about sophisticated things like algorithms. And we spent years working on that. But in the very beginning of the occupation, in the places left by the Russian soldiers, I find this paper, Komsomolskaya Pravda, the major Russian paper with 7 million circulation, which was a leaflet for war. This was everywhere where the Russian soldiers were staying. There was explained, why they need to wage this war. There was a name of the editor-in-chief, of a build editor, of everybody who worked on that. And I was fascinated today to see a photo in one of the newly liberated areas. It was not the same issue, but the same paper, which is also went on justifying the Russian atrocities for the last half a year. And on my way here, I was driving with the famous American historian, a great friend of Ukraine, Tim Snyder, and we really discussed that it's unique that the genocidal attempt are openly mentioned in the Russian press. He remembered a lot of genocides, but he says, it's never been so obvious. And to finalize with that, we work with incredible colleagues. We are very happy so for our Ukrainian projects. There are Syrians are joining, so we won't be considered non-objective just because we're Ukrainians. But also our senior colleague, Janine Di Giovanni, one of the co-founders, is the American reporter who always talks about responsibility. She covered 4 genocides, 18 wars, about the responsibility of the people who did the same in Syria and Chechnya and now doing in Ukraine. But for me, reporting my country, the question would be not about the accountability but about the prevention. I think there is something else happening incredible in this world. This war is very fast, and this is a moment when we shouldn't wait till the end. And our idea is not to wait till the end and then punish those who did something wrong. We're in the position to to do something. And I said, in democracy, I have this responsibility, ethical responsibility to act. So if we believe the world is democratic, there is this ethical responsibility for the others also to act. That would be my connection and introduction.
Thank you, Nataliya. We'll discuss here for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to all of you to ask questions as well. Peter, maybe I'm going to start with a question for you. You talked about the violence of language and the meaning being stripped away from language. What role do you think social media, as we've heard here, social media can also be a boon and a benefit to democracy, but what role do you think social media has played in exacerbating and augmenting that violence?
That's a really good question. I mean, look, I'd love to blame everything on Mark Zuckerberg, and I think definitely in terms of their duty of care in places like Burma, where essentially extreme mass violence against the Rohingya was exacerbated, spread, organized on Facebook, and Facebook did very, very little. There's a real failure of duty of care there. But as much as I would love to blame everything on him, I lived and worked in Russia between 2001 and 2010, where I already saw traditional media being used to strip away meaning, to create dehumanizing language. Really, the attack on dehumanizing Ukrainians started in 2004, after the Orange Revolution in Kiev. It's a long, long, long process. I suppose what happens is that whenever a new media arrives, there's always a lot of excitement about this first. So when radio first appears at the start of the 20th century, you literally have people and even poets writing poems to how radio will bring everybody across the world together to understand each other. We will never have wars again because people will hear each other across borders. So a little bit like the first euphoria around social media would connect everybody across borders, and there would never be wars again, or something. And then, but what happens when a new media appears is the constraints, the norms, which are cultural norms, sometimes legal norms, but are cultural norms that were put in place around the sort of language which goes hand in hand with violence. When a new media appears, that dam is broken. And we've had that with social media. We've had post-Second World War, we had so many official but also unspoken norms around what you can and can't say in broadcast media. Sometimes enforced legally, like in Germany, or enforced sort of culturally more in America. And suddenly the new media arrives, the taboos are broken, and all the evil demons that have been waiting there can come out. And you have a repeat. You have a repeat of what we saw in the 1930s. So I think that's what happened. It happened with radio as well. Starts off idealistically, then very quickly Hitler and Stalin work out how to use radio for very, very evil ends. And I think with social media as well, what I assume or I hope we will get is some sort of balancing and a sequence of cultural norms, legal norms that will start restraining that again. But that's something that has to be done. It doesn't happen naturally. And I suppose our theme today is cooperation. The key is for democracies now to find the common norms around understanding how to regulate the social media space. Because if we have America do one thing entirely, Europe do another one, Australia another one, we're going to have this very weird, lopsided space. We won't be able to enforce any kind of regulatory discipline on it, and the problems will continue. So it's a really key moment for democracies to come together around the core principles of regulating the online space. And I say this, I'm very much, as a journalist, very much on the as much free speech as possible side of things. It's a very delicate process. It's a very delicate balancing act, but it's one that historically we have to go through.
Anna Maria, cooperation was one of your key points in the remarks that you delivered earlier. if cooperation is vital to protecting and defending democracy on an urban level, we talked about urban diplomacy, what would that cooperation look like in a relationship, for example, between Minsk and Berlin? How can that partnership strengthen democracy?
Well, I think we see that cities can open a leeway, of course, if there is a political understanding and the common path that they are working towards, so that they are committed to democratic values, to freedom, to human rights, and so on. And we do that. So when at the national level the leeway is closed, urban diplomacy from a city to city diplomacy can open new networks of solidarity. So I will make it very concrete with also with Berlin and Warsaw, or with Berlin and with Kiev, where we are helping in times of crisis, where we are solidarizing ourselves with the cities of freedom, where they are threatened by their nationalist governments. But we can implement here like instruments like the promotion of free media and critical journalism. So what we did implement here in Berlin is to have a scholarship which is called the Cosmopolitan Berlin, where journalists, human rights activists from Belarus, from Russia as well, now from Ukraine, can get a scholarship and continue their work on digital journalism in order to provide information that is reliable and that is an alternative narrative to the propaganda that normal people would have access to. So I think we should have a look at what cities can do more concrete. We are also now planning another program to we are implementing it with promoting the local journalists that are now arrived in the city, where we see that we become the city of exile. We can put all democratic forces together, and we can support this work of journalists that are facing threat from their national governments, and then we can make their work visible by putting funds into it, by delivering a platform where they can, make visible the other part, the other truth, that also has been mentioned before.
Franak, is that a cooperation that helps, for example, journalists in Belarus to have this lifeline, if you will, to come to Berlin, to work here freely, and then perhaps go back? What does that cooperation look like from the other end?
Absolutely, because people in Belarus are deprived of their own country. Basically, there was a guy who just came and seized the country with the support of another guy on the east. And right now, Lukashenko said that everyone who is against our state will be deprived of citizenship. And of course, people are fleeing. Sometimes it's not you don't have choice, either to go to prison or you have to flee. And the city of Berlin really, really provided help, and can be example for other cities, because it opened the hub for journalists and for civil society activists. And those journalists who were working in Belarus 1 year ago, right now they do the same, but from Berlin. Also artists, and I think this is where we can invest much more. Art residences, cooperation, because culture, it unites, it adjusts, it helps, it strengthens identity as well. Because if you're a cultural activist, you represent the whole nation. When you cooperate with others, you still represent your nation. It strengthens you, but it also strengthens society which stands behind you. So I would say we need such projects a lot. Also, telling stories if, for example, we want Germans and Berliners to know more about what's happening in Ukraine or in Belarus, we can use visuals more actively through the digital exhibitions, offline exhibitions, because attention span is very short, and in order to keep interest to our region, to Ukraine, to Belarus, we should remind every day. It's like in marketing. It's not enough to have one contact, you need 1,000 contacts a week in order to keep this topic on the top of the agenda. And cities can do much more perhaps as ever in history. And I think for Belarus particularly what's important is internship. You know, Belarusians, we lost 28 years in this Goodbye Lenin movie, and now we started to work with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as government in exile, and we found out that we don't have anyone to hire because there are no specialists, no experts, no people who can work on diplomacy, on public administration. Those few dozens who studied in American, British universities not enough, or they have already important jobs. So internships and scholarships, this is something that also cities can provide. We don't need the whole educational cycle, but internship, 3-6 months working in the city hall, how decisions are being made, how laws are being prepared, what urban problems can be solved and how. This is something that can help us now and today.
Mm-hmm. And Franak, to follow up on that, could you bring us up to date on where the democracy movement in Belarus stands right now? We heard the conversation with Svetlana yesterday, but maybe you can bring us up to date on what the outlook is right now for people who are part of that movement.
You know, people are in the Windows, there is the safe mode with the blue screen. So the society is in this mode. You know, you have 3 buttons to click, but it's not functioning. The state and country is not functioning. People are afraid of escalation of war. People are afraid of terror, of repressions. The only news people are following every day is the news how many people and who was detained last night. Because all detentions are taking place between 6 and 8 a.m. in the morning. So if at 9 a.m. you have already information how many of your friends are jailed. And of course, in such atmosphere, there is impossible for society to function normally. But still, some people find strength to resist. And Ukraine's victories, let's say, so far not strategic, but tactical victories inspire a lot Belarusian societies. And it seems that Ukrainian victory will open the window of opportunities for Belarusians to bring democratic changes. Lukashenko feels fragile, insecure. He sees that Putin is not so stable as he was in February, and I think weakened Putin will be weakening Lukashenko. And when changes will start, it will be very fast. It will be very, very quick, and every change on the Ukrainian front, you know, it creates turbulence within nomenclatura. And I think this is what we failed to do in 2020. We failed to split nomenclatura and elites. Because Putin came and said, if you will be serving Lukashenko, I will protect you, nomenclatura. And they believed him. Right now, there is a big chance that Putin will not be able to protect them anymore. And this gives us a big hope.
That's a really interesting insight, Franak. Thank you. And Nataliya, I want to ask you about the project that you mentioned, the work that you're doing throughout Ukraine, the stories that you're telling. Is that an antidote to disinformation, do you find? And I ask because myself as a journalist traveling through the US, you often think, and we've heard this sentiment expressed here as well, that the stories you tell will serve as an example of truth or will hold up a fact to light, but instead you're met with an inability to accept that truth. I'll call it that. So would you say that the work that you're doing can effectively fight disinformation?
Absolutely. I think one of the crimes which is also often committed in such cases is the crime of the denial. And we still, here in Berlin, you can find things you would find, remembering this, I would say that there would be people who still would say that maybe Holocaust didn't happen. And later, it's more often would say there won't be genocide in Rwanda, Srebrenica was kind of fake. It's still happening. And the more things we're developing, so exactly what is my urge, first of all, is really to record every story to a point when it won't be deniable. It will be so strong. So, for instance, Russians, they deny the atrocities in Bucha, but, you know, because of the journalists, it's impossible to deny. They deny it to the extent that they give the medal for the Kremlin given the medals for the officers and for the soldiers which were committing those atrocities for particular platoon there. So that is an incredibly important thing. Also, it's even more, I think that, you know, Ukraine is a huge country, and if earlier the dictators, they tried to hide some of the things, now I think there is this abundance of things which are happening, and therefore maybe I'm concerned that the war crimes would become a buzzword, and then the journalists won't record those stories because they think like, oh, it's anyway everybody's speaking about the war crimes, but the stories are not recorded. I'm giving you an example. You know, there was a moment when I felt in April that, you know, a crime stopped to become in the news because the major media outlets expect something worse. So, you know, like if there is some tragic story as in Mariupol when the whole city is bombarded and we are concerned about tens of thousands of people dead, or for instance a whole drama theater where the thousands of people were trying to find an asylum, then it was destroyed, that unless you find something equal, it stops to become a crime. And then I remember that when there was a Bucha, there was a question and request like, can you tell us something more horrible? Because it's not that exciting, it's not that bad to be reported. So my task is partially also to find a way to tell the other stories, that they are, you know, because every story deserves to be told. So for instance, by absolute chance, just give you an example of the scale of what's going on. I was traveling in April in the villages, which were not so particularly interesting and big for the international press. And just asking for my way, I met like in 3 separate villages, 3 elderly men. And in every case, it turned out they lost their sons. One was killed in his house when the Russians came into it for no reasons. Another tried to escape and was not allowed to escape, and he was a civilian. And third died under the shelling. Their stories aren't in the international media. They are not even in the Ukrainian media that much. So one of our tasks is also to, you know, we won't be able to remember every story, but still have this understanding that every story matters, every life matters, and the savior of every life is important. So I do think it works, and the real story is one of the most important antidotes of the disinformation. You need to tell it in a way. And that's why it's very interesting, because in our project, which we work with lawyers, and yes, we were trained to find the way how to ask the questions so they would be able to go to court. In fact, I'm quite experienced journalist, but it really helped for me, you know, to really get into the facts and be so secure and confident in what I do that I know if our film goes and somebody would dare to tell us that we invented that, as for instance the propagandists usually do and authoritarian governments used to do, that would be the file of the you know, legal support evidence to tell no. So for us, it's also the part. For us, it's also the part to make it undeniable, also in legal terms.
Documenting each crime. Yeah.
I just wanted to emphasize the importance of what Nataliya and the whole team of Ukrainian journalists are doing. It's documentation. Documentation of every fact, even if it's not a hype story, if it's not on top news, it's important, will be written, the dry fact, the dry photo. In Belarus, when Lukashenko cracked down the media in 2020, they closed down all major portals. He wiped out the whole history of Belarus for 20 years. You cannot Google right now what was in Belarus in 2004, 2007. It was totally cleared because all the servers of all media were confiscated and destroyed. And right now, we don't want what Lukashenko said 10, 15 years ago, what crimes he committed in 1999. And this is why what Ukrainians are doing, fixing every fact. And we will be doing in Belarus the same. Documenting, even if it's not go to headlines, it's important to keep it in the archive, to keep it in database, to not allow, or George Orwell's, these office workers to clear and to change history in the future.
I think this part is very important on the one hand, but and it shows that we need various pillars in order to achieve that. And here we come again. So there we need the activists and the engagement, the lawyers, and also civil society and further on that are documenting all this. I wanted just to share, I thought of one experience when it comes into the international sphere and networks like Metropolis or C40, where the people, from other continents ask, why should we take a stance on the Russian war in Ukraine, in Europe, because we didn't take a clear position when it came to other wars. So I think what we need to learn is also that we need to keep it visible at that stage as well. And obviously you have experiences in very destabilized systems, and from Berlin, it is a privilege to live in peace and to have a democracy that works and so on. And I think when it comes to the cities also, it is important for us to take responsibility and to be allies on this democracy forces that are thriving for a change and for a systemic shift, and to make that visible and to make it clear and to bring it on the agenda, to bring it when it comes to making declarations, communiques, or something for the Urban 20 diplomats and everything. Because I think if we do not care or if we do not talk about it, I don't think it's realistic that it will be capable to be in all cities, in all the media every day. There are a lot of multiple crises that people, they are getting used to certain things. But it's true that we do not need that sensationalistic sense of how bad is a war, because there is where we start to get used to it, and we are not allowed to get used to it. We need to reinforce this narrative and to make it visible at all levels. So I think there is something where we need cooperation, and we need to reach a narrative at the various levels altogether.
Let me shortly jump in to share that. I think it's also very important to understand there should be a very different approach to the different communities. You've spoken about something. We can help Syrian activists in one way and Belarusians in others, because for them they don't have access to their country and they can do in exile. What, for instance, in Ukraine, which we're feeling and which I often also tell on the different platforms like this, that for us, this war, it's more not like the war of the access. We have access. I once was invited to recently get the link to this program support for the Ukrainian reporters. I think it was one of the German foundation. And I'm really honestly grateful for every support which is there. And it was said that this is for journalists who cannot express themselves and who are under the pressure of the governments. And I said, look, it doesn't work for us. I cannot qualify anybody. We don't have a pressure from our government. We live in we are a democratic state. There is no pressure. So somehow the Ukrainian journalists, I think there was a question that there was a profile of one type of the...
That's why we have a different approach in it. That's why we have a second program right now where we are concretely addressing local journalists from Ukraine as well, where they can apply for this thing. So I think there are various instruments that you need to implement, and
absolutely,
it's only one example.
Just finalize. So I treat this war for us as a bit like a support which is needed during the natural disaster. Like when you have no bridges, no roads, no fuel, and you really just need to make people be there on the ground to do what we exactly discussed with Franak. And I also used it then opportunity to really thank, because I really, like being kind of a couple of days here, I do understand how much is done. For me in Kyiv, sometimes it's not visible, we're preoccupied, but I also should say that all this support which is given, it's not in vain. It really helps. It really, really, really,
We are totally
really
sure.
helps.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. I'll ask one more question and then open it up to all of you. We do have microphones that will be going around, so I'd just ask you to raise your hand. Peter, maybe one more question to you about what we've just been discussing. What do you think, from your experience working as a journalist in Russia, as well as this democratic toolbox that journalists might need, either from cities or from other countries, to be able to effectively combat disinformation or state control, like in Belarus, where it's hard to actually access information or report?
Well, maybe Franak can talk to the daily struggles, because they're constantly evolving in the context of the technology. But what we're seeing globally is the emergence of the need for some sort of model of offshore journalism, where journalists are being pushed out of their countries in Latin America, parts of Africa, Belarus, Asia. And their fear, whenever I talk to them, is to lose contact with their audiences.